The folding table was set up in the middle of my storm shelter at 7:42 on a Thursday morning, and Karen Delacroix was already plugging in her laminator. I stood at the top of the concrete stairs, coffee in hand, watching her unspool an orange extension cord across my floor, like she was decorating for a church social. She had a clipboard. She had a radio. She had a 3-ring binder with a printed cover that read, Willow Creek Estates Emergency Operations Plan, in bold Arial font. And she had the audacity to look up at me and say, "Oh good, you're here. I need you to move your truck so the volunteer fire department can set up the triage station." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just looked at the folding table, the stack of laminated evacuation maps, the case of bottled water she'd already dragged down the stairs, and the portable weather radio squawking static in the corner. My shelter. The one I'd reinforced with 12-inch concrete walls and a steel door after the 2011 tornado season. The one I'd paid for with my own savings after 22 years as a paramedic. The one my late wife Elena had painted the interior of, soft yellow, because she said if we ever had to ride out a storm down there, she didn't want to feel like we were in a tomb. Karen was standing on Elena's yellow walls. "Mrs. Delacroix," I said, and my voice was calm, the way I'd learned to sound when I was talking down a patient in shock. "What are you doing in my storm shelter?" She didn't look up from her clipboard. "It's not your storm shelter, Marcus. It's been designated as the official Willow Creek Estates Emergency Command Center. The board voted on it last month. You should have received the notice." "I didn't." "Well, that's not my problem. Now, about your truck. It's my shelter, on my property, behind my house. I built it, I paid for it, I own it." She finally looked at me, and her expression was the kind of patient condescension I'd seen 1,000 times in my career, usually from administrators who'd never touched a patient, but thought they knew how to run a trauma bay. "Marcus, the shelter is listed in the county's Emergency Preparedness Registry as a community asset. The HOA has assumed operational control for the safety of all residents. This isn't personal, it's protocol. Show me the document." "Excuse me?" "Show me the document that gives you operational control of my private property." She tapped her clipboard. "I don't have time for this. The drill starts at 8. "Then you'd better find the document fast." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her recalculating. Karen Delacroix was not used to being questioned. She'd been HOA president for 6 years, and in that time she'd transformed the board from a sleepy group of retirees who argued about mailbox colors into a miniature bureaucracy with its own letterhead, its own enforcement committee, and its own fleet of white SUVs that patrolled the neighborhood like mall security with a superiority complex. She was 58 years old, a former real estate agent who still dressed like she was about to show a 4-bedroom colonial, and she had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no by anyone who mattered. But I wasn't anyone who mattered to her. I was just the retired paramedic who lived in the old ranch house at the end of Willow Creek Road, the one with the reinforced storm shelter that everyone in the neighborhood knew about because I'd opened it to families during the 2013 tornado outbreak. 12 people had crowded into this shelter that night, including Karen and her husband. We'd listened to the wind scream overhead while Elena handed out blankets, and I kept the radio tuned to the weather service. Karen had thanked me afterward, her face pale and her hands shaking. She'd said, "We're so lucky you built this." That was 11 years ago. Now she was plugging in a laminator. "I'll have the board secretary send you the resolution," she said finally, her tone clipped. "But right now, I need you to clear the area. We have volunteers arriving." "No. No. This is my property. You don't have permission to be here. You don't have permission to set up a command center. You don't have permission to run a drill. You need to pack up your equipment and leave." Her face tightened. "Marcus, I'm trying to be reasonable. You're trespassing. That's not reasonable. That's illegal." She set her clipboard down on the folding table with a deliberate click. "Fine. If you want to do this the hard way, we'll do this the hard way." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "I'm calling the sheriff. We'll let them sort out who has authority here." "Go ahead." She paused, her thumb hovering over the screen. She'd expected me to back down. Most people did. Most people didn't want the hassle of a confrontation with law enforcement, even if they were in the right. But I'd spent 2 decades dealing with people who thought they were in charge during emergencies, and I'd learned that the loudest voice in the room was rarely the one with the actual authority. You're making a mistake, she said. I've made plenty. This isn't one of them. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who's out there listening to this kind of neighborhood insanity. Karen didn't call the sheriff, not yet. Instead, she called someone else, and within 10 minutes, a white HOA SUV pulled up to my back gate, and a nervous-looking man in a polo shirt climbed out clutching a manila folder like it was a shield. This was Dennis Park, the HOA treasurer, a retired accountant who'd been on the board for 3 years and looked like he'd been regretting it for 2.5. He was 63, thin, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and he had the haunted expression of a man who joined the board to help his community and had instead become Karen's personal paperwork mule. Marcus, he said, approaching me with the folder extended, I have the board resolution here. It was passed on March 14th. It designates your storm shelter as the official. Let me see it. He handed me the folder. I opened it and read the resolution. It was typed on HOA letterhead, signed by Karen as president and Dennis as secretary, and it stated that the storm shelter located at 1427 Willow Creek Road shall serve as the Willow Creek Estates Emergency Command Center for all community-wide emergency operations. It cited a county preparedness grant as the funding source for equipment and supplies. It referenced a site control agreement that I had supposedly signed. I never signed this, I said. Dennis blinked. What? The site control agreement. I never signed anything. I never agreed to this. I didn't even know about it until 10 minutes ago. Karen appeared at the top of the shelter stairs, her arms crossed. The board has the authority to designate community safety resources. It's in the covenants. Show me where. It's in the covenants, she repeated, as if saying it twice made it true. Show me the exact language, the article and section. She didn't answer. Dennis looked at his shoes. The volunteer firefighter who'd arrived during our argument, a young woman named Sarah Okonkwo who lived 3 streets over, was standing by her truck with her arms crossed, watching the whole thing unfold with an expression that suggested she'd seen Karen pull stunts like this before. Mrs. Delacroix, I said, you're telling me that the HOA board passed a resolution claiming operational control of private property without the property owner's knowledge or consent, and you're citing a grant application that lists a site control agreement that doesn't exist. Is that correct? The grant application is a separate matter. Is that correct? Her jaw tightened. The board acted in good faith. That's not what I asked. Dennis cleared his throat. Marcus, maybe we should all take a step back and... No, I said. I'm not stepping back. I'm standing on my own property, looking at a board resolution that claims authority over something I built with my own hands, and I'm being told it's for a grant that I never consented to. So no, Dennis, I'm not stepping back. I'm asking questions, and I'm going to keep asking them until I get answers. Karen descended the stairs slowly, her heels clicking on the concrete. She stopped at the bottom and looked at me with the kind of expression she probably used to close difficult real estate deals, a mix of condescension and fake warmth. Marcus, I understand you're upset, but this is bigger than you. The county preparedness grant provides funding for equipment that benefits the entire community. Radios, medical supplies, a generator. Your shelter is the only reinforced structure in the neighborhood that can serve as a command center during a severe weather event. The board made a practical decision. You made a decision about my property without me. We made a decision for the community. You made a decision that involves a grant application with a false statement. Her expression flickered. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's an observation. You said there's a site control agreement. I'm telling you there isn't one. That means the grant application contains a false statement. That's not an accusation. That's a fact. Dennis was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Sarah, the firefighter, had pulled out her phone and was either taking notes or recording. I couldn't tell which. The morning sun was climbing higher, and the heat was starting to build, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear a lawnmower starting up. The sound of a normal Thursday morning in a neighborhood that had no idea its HOA president was standing in a private storm shelter trying to claim it as community property. I think, Karen said slowly, that we should continue this conversation at the board meeting next week. I think, I said, that you should pack up your equipment and get off my property, now. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she turned to Dennis. Call off the drill. We'll reschedule. Dennis nodded and started making calls. Sarah climbed back into her truck and drove away, but not before giving me a small nod that I couldn't quite interpret. Karen supervised the removal of her equipment with the grim efficiency of a general retreating from a battlefield she still believed she could win. The folding table was folded. The laminator was unplugged. The bottled water was hauled back up the stairs. The laminated maps were rolled up and tucked under her arm like a baton. As she passed me on her way to her SUV, she paused. This isn't over, Marcus. I know. The board has authority. The board has a resolution. That's not the same thing. She climbed into her SUV and drove away, and I stood in my backyard, watching the dust settle on the gravel path that led to my shelter, and I thought about Elena. I thought about the day we'd painted those walls, the way she'd hummed while she worked, the way she'd said, "If we ever have to go down there, I want it to feel like morning." She'd been gone for 4 years now, taken by a stroke that came out of nowhere on a quiet Sunday afternoon, and the shelter had become something more than a shelter. It was a place where I could still feel her presence, where the yellow walls still held the echo of her humming. And Karen Delacroix had plugged a laminator into my wife's memory. I went inside and made another cup of coffee. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and started making phone calls. The first call was to the County Emergency Management Office. I asked to speak with someone about the Community Preparedness Grant Program, and after being transferred twice, I reached a woman named Patricia Mbele, who was the county's emergency preparedness coordinator. She had a calm, professional voice and the kind of patient manner that suggested she'd spent years explaining complex regulations to confuse citizens. "I'm calling about a grant application that lists my property," I said. 1427 Willow Creek Road, the storm shelter. "Let me pull up the file," she said. I heard keyboard clicking in the background. "Yes, here it is. The Willow Creek Estates Emergency Operations Center grant. Submitted by the HOA board president, Karen Delacroix. Approved for $47,500 in equipment and supplies. Can you tell me what documentation was submitted with the application?" "Standard package, site control statement, proof of insurance, board resolution, equipment inventory, budget breakdown." "The site control statement. Can you read me what it says?" More keyboard clicking. "It states that the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association has legal control of the storm shelter located at 1427 Willow Creek Road, and that the property owner has consented to its use as a community emergency operations center." "I'm the property owner. I never consented." There was a long pause. "Mr. Chen, are you telling me that the site control statement is inaccurate?" "I'm telling you that I never signed anything. I never agreed to anything. I didn't even know about the grant application until this morning, when I found the HOA president setting up a command center in my shelter without my permission." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mr. Chen, if what you're saying is accurate, this is a serious problem. The grant terms require a valid site control agreement. If the application contains a false statement, the grant could be revoked, and the HOA could be required to return any funds already disbursed." "How much has been disbursed?" $23,750. The first installment." "And what equipment has been purchased?" "According to the file, radios, a generator, medical supplies, and a portable weather station. Some of it may have already been delivered." I thought about the radio I'd seen in my shelter, the portable weather station, the case of bottled water. "Can you send me copies of everything in the file? The application, the site control statement, the board resolution, everything?" "I can, but I'll need a formal records request. Tell me how to submit one." She walked me through the process, and I wrote down every step. Then she said, "Mr. Chen, I want you to know that our office takes grant fraud very seriously. If the site control statement is false, we will investigate." "Good," I said, because I wanted investigated. I hung up and made my second call. This one was to a title company I'd used when I bought the property 26 years ago. I asked them to pull the full title history for 1427 Willow Creek Road, including the original deed, any easements, any covenants, and any HOA documents that reference the property. "How far back do you want to go?" the title officer asked. "To the original land grant if you have it, but I'm specifically interested in anything that shows whether the storm shelter is included in the HOA boundary. That's an unusual request." It's an unusual situation. She promised to have the documents ready within 3 days. I thanked her and hung up. The third call was to my neighbor, Eleanor Vance, the widow who lived in the house to the north of mine. Eleanor was 74, a retired school teacher who'd lost her husband the same year I'd lost Elena. And we'd developed the quiet friendship of two people who understood grief without needing to talk about it. She answered on the second ring. "Marcus, is everything all right?" "Eleanor, did you know about the HOA's plan to use my shelter as a command center?" She was quiet for a moment. I knew they were talking about it. Karen mentioned it at the last board meeting. She said you'd agreed to let them use it. I never agreed. Oh, another pause. "Oh, Marcus, I'm so sorry. I should have asked you directly. It's not your fault, but I need to know what else she's been saying. Has she told anyone else that I donated the shelter?" Eleanor hesitated. "She told the board that you donated it to the community, that you wanted it to be used for emergency operations. She said you were too modest to make a big deal about it, but that you'd given your verbal consent." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "She told the board I donated my storm shelter." "Yes, it's in the meeting minutes. I can send you a copy." "Please do." "Marcus, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to document everything," I said. "And then I'm going to let the county sort it out." I spent the rest of the day gathering information. Eleanor sent me the board meeting minutes, which showed that Karen had indeed told the board I'd generously donated the shelter for community use. The minutes also showed that the board had voted 4-1 to accept the donation and designate the shelter as the official command center. The one dissenting vote was from a board member named Tomas Reyes, who I didn't know well but who apparently had enough sense to question a donation that had never been confirmed in writing. I called Tomas that evening. He was a civil engineer who'd moved to the neighborhood 3 years ago, and he sounded surprised to hear from me. "Mr. Chen, what can I do for you? I saw that you voted against the shelter resolution. I wanted to know why." He was quiet for a moment because it didn't feel right. "Karen said you donated the shelter, but there was no written agreement, no deed transfer, no easement, nothing on paper. I asked her to get something in writing from you before the vote, and she said she'd take care of it. Then she called the vote anyway. She never asked me for anything in writing." "I figured," he sighed. "Look, Mr. Chen, I joined the board because I wanted to help maintain the neighborhood. But Karen, she runs things like she's the mayor of a small town. She doesn't like being questioned, and she's been pushing this grant thing hard. She said it would bring in almost $50,000 for emergency equipment. Did she ever mention that the grant application requires a site control agreement? She said she had one." "She doesn't." Tomas was quiet for a long moment. "That's a problem." "Yes, it is. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to let the county investigate, but I wanted you to know, in case anyone asks you about the vote." "I appreciate that." He paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have pushed harder." "You voted no. That's more than anyone else did." I hung up and added Tomas's statement to my growing file. The folder was getting thicker. Board minutes, grant application details, Eleanor's account of what Karen had told the board, Patricia Mbele's confirmation that the site control statement was required, and soon, the title documents that would show exactly what the HOA did and didn't control. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office and submitted my formal records request. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Gloria who'd been working there for 30 years, took my form and glanced at it. "Willow Creek Estates grant file?" she said. "That's the second request I've seen for that this week. Who made the first one?" "Can't tell you that. Privacy rules." But I had a pretty good idea. Someone else was asking questions. Maybe Dennis, the nervous treasurer. Maybe Tomas. Maybe someone on the board who'd realized that Karen's story didn't add up. I spent the weekend waiting for the title documents and reviewing what I already had. The more I looked at the grant application, the more problems I found. The site control statement wasn't just missing my signature. It was missing any reference to the actual property deed. It listed the shelter as HOA-owned infrastructure and cited a parcel number that didn't match mine. The equipment inventory included items that had never been delivered to my property, and the budget breakdown showed $12,000 allocated for site preparation and access improvements that had never been performed. Karen hadn't just made a mistake. She'd built an entire grant application on a foundation of false statements. On Monday morning, the title documents arrived. I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and read through them carefully. The original deed for 1427 Willow Creek Road was dated 1972, when the property was first subdivided from a larger farm parcel. The deed included a legal description that specifically excluded the property from any future homeowners association covenants. The storm shelter, which I'd built in 2010, was entirely within my property boundaries and was listed on the county tax assessor's records as a private improvement, not a community asset. But the most interesting document was the HOA's own plat map, filed with the county in 1998. The map showed the HOA boundary running along the eastern edge of my property, but it specifically excluded the rear 2 acres where the shelter was located. The shelter wasn't just outside the HOA's jurisdiction. It was explicitly excluded from it. Karen Delacroix had claimed authority over a structure that the HOA's own founding documents said it didn't control. I made copies of everything: the deed, the plat map, the tax records, the board minutes, the grant application, the site control statement with its false claims. I organized them in a folder with labeled tabs, the way I used to organize patient charts in the ambulance. Everything in order, everything documented, everything ready to be presented to whoever needed to see it. Then I waited. The next board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. I didn't plan to attend. I planned to let the county process work its way through the system, slow and methodical, the way bureaucracy works when it's been given clear evidence of fraud. But Karen had other plans. On Wednesday afternoon, I came home from the hardware store to find a certified letter taped to my front door. It was from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Blackwood & Associates, that specialized in community association law. The letter informed me that the HOA was filing a declaratory judgment action to establish its right to use the storm shelter for community emergency operations. It cited the board resolution, the grant requirements, and the property owner's implied consent through prior community use. Implied consent? That was a new one. They were arguing that because I'd let neighbors use the shelter during the 2013 tornado, I'd somehow given the HOA permanent rights to it. I read the letter twice. Then I called my own attorney, a woman named Diane Okonkwo, who happened to be Sarah the firefighter's aunt. I'd met Diane years ago when she'd helped me settle Elena's estate, and she was the kind of lawyer who didn't waste time on posturing. She read the letter while I waited on the phone. Implied consent, she said, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. That's creative. It's also nonsense. There's no legal basis for it. They're trying to intimidate you. I figured, what do you recommend? Don't respond to the letter. Let them file their action. Meanwhile, you said you've been in contact with the county about the grant? Yes? Good. Keep pushing that angle. If the county finds the grant application was fraudulent, the HOA's entire case collapses. They can't claim a right to your property based on a grant that was obtained through false statements. What about the board meeting tomorrow? Don't go. Let them talk. Let them put everything on the record. The more they say in public, the more evidence you'll have. I took her advice. I stayed home on Thursday evening, while the board met in the community clubhouse half a mile away. Eleanor called me afterward, her voice tight with anger. Marcus, Karen told the board that you're trying to sabotage the community's emergency preparedness. She said you're being selfish and that the attorney will force you to comply. She made it sound like you're putting the whole neighborhood at risk. What did the board say? Most of them agreed with her. Tomas tried to push back, but Karen shut him down. She said the grant money is already spent, and that if the shelter isn't available, the HOA will have to repay the county out of its own reserves. That sounds like her problem, not mine. She's telling everyone it's your fault. Let her. The truth doesn't care what she tells people. I hung up and added Eleanor's account to my folder. The file was getting thick now, thick enough that it felt heavy in my hands, heavy with all the lies and false claims and arrogant assumptions that Karen had been building for months. The county investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, Karen escalated. She sent 2 more certified letters, each one more threatening than the last. She had the HOA's maintenance crew install a sign at the entrance to my driveway that read, Willow Creek Estates Emergency Operations Center, with an arrow pointing toward my back gate. She organized a neighborhood meeting at the clubhouse where she presented a slideshow about the grant program and described my shelter as a community resource that one resident is trying to withhold. I didn't attend the meeting, but Sarah Okonkwo did, and she recorded the whole thing on her phone. She sent me the recording that night. I thought you should hear this, she said in her message. She's not just lying about the shelter, she's lying about you. I listened to the recording at my kitchen table. Karen's voice filled the room, polished and confident, telling 47 of my neighbors that I was obstructing community safety and violating the spirit of the neighborhood. She said I'd initially agreed to the shelter's use, but had changed my mind for personal reasons. She said the HOA was pursuing all legal options to ensure the shelter remained available. She never mentioned that I'd never agreed. She never mentioned the false site control statement. She never mentioned that the shelter was explicitly excluded from the HOA boundary. I saved the recording to my folder. On the Monday of the 4th week, Patricia Mbele called me from the County Emergency Management Office. Her voice was different this time, more formal, more careful. Mr. Chen, I wanted to let you know that our office has completed its preliminary review of the Willow Creek Estates grant application. We've identified several discrepancies that require further investigation. The grant funds have been frozen pending the outcome. What kind of discrepancies? I can't share details while the investigation is ongoing, but I can tell you that the site control statement is a significant concern. We've also identified issues with the equipment inventory and the budget documentation. What happens next? Our office will conduct a formal audit. We'll need to interview the grant applicant and review all supporting documentation. If we find that the application contained false statements, the grant will be revoked and the HOA will be required to return all disbursed funds. And if they can't return the funds, then the county may pursue legal action to recover them. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called Diane Okonkwo and told her what Patricia had said. Good, Diane said. That's exactly what we needed. The county's investigation will create a public record of the fraud. Once that record exists, the HOA's legal threats become meaningless. They can't sue you for access to a shelter they claim through fraud. What should I do in the meantime? Nothing? Wait. Let the county do its work and keep documenting everything. The county audit took another 2 weeks. During that time, something shifted in the neighborhood. People stopped avoiding my eyes when I walked to my mailbox. A few neighbors stopped me to ask questions, quietly, carefully, as if they were afraid of being overheard. Is it true that Karen lied about the grant? One of them asked. A young mother named Jessica who lived 4 houses down. The county is investigating, I said. That's all I can tell you right now. She told us you donated the shelter. She said you were just being difficult now because you didn't like her. I never donated anything. I never agreed to anything. She never asked. Jessica's expression hardened. She's been collecting extra dues for the Emergency Preparedness Fund, $50 per household. She said it was required for the grant match. I hadn't known that. How many households? All of them. 83 houses. That's over $4,000. I added that to my notes. The folder was becoming a ledger of Karen's deceptions. Each entry another weight on the scale that was tipping slowly, inexorably, toward her downfall. The county scheduled a site visit for the following Tuesday. Patricia Mbele would be coming with a team to inspect the shelter and review the documentation in person. She asked if I would be available to provide access and answer questions. I'll be here, I said. We've also notified the HOA board that we'll need to interview Mrs. Delacroix during the visit. She's required to be present. Good. Tuesday morning arrived clear and warm, the kind of spring day that made the neighborhood look like a postcard. I was sitting on my back porch with coffee when the county vehicles pulled up. 2 sedans and a van with the emergency management logo on the side. Patricia Mbele stepped out of the first sedan, a tall woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and a no-nonsense expression. She was accompanied by a younger man carrying a clipboard and a woman with a camera. Karen's white SUV was already parked near my back gate. She was standing beside it with Dennis Park and another board member I didn't recognize, a woman in a business suit who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Karen was wearing her board meeting clothes, a navy blazer and pearls, and she was holding her laminated binder like a shield. Mr. Chen, Patricia said, approaching me. I'm Patricia Mbele. We spoke on the phone. Yes, thank you for coming. This is a standard site inspection for the grant audit. We'll need to see the shelter, review the documentation, and interview both you and Mrs. Delacroix. I'm ready. Karen approached us, her heels sinking slightly into the gravel. Patricia, I want to clarify that the HOA has been operating in good faith. Any discrepancies in the application are administrative errors that we're prepared to correct. Patricia's expression didn't change. We'll discuss that during the interview, Mrs. Delacroix. For now, I'd like to see the shelter. I led them down the concrete stairs and unlocked the steel door. The shelter was exactly as I'd left it, clean and quiet, the yellow walls glowing softly in the fluorescent light. Patricia and her team spent 20 minutes inspecting the space, taking photographs, measuring dimensions, and comparing what they saw to the grant application's description. The application describes this as a 400-square-foot facility with built-in communications equipment and a dedicated generator, Patricia said, reading from her clipboard. I'm seeing approximately 250 square feet with no built-in communications and no generator. The generator was purchased with grant funds, Karen said quickly. It's being stored at the clubhouse until installation. The grant specified that all equipment was to be installed at the site listed in the application. Why wasn't it installed here? We were waiting for the site control issue to be resolved. The site control issue, Patricia repeated. You mean the fact that the property owner never consented to the grant application? Karen's face tightened. The property owner's consent was implied by prior community use. Mrs. Delacroix, there is no legal doctrine of implied consent for grant applications. The site control statement you submitted was either accurate or it wasn't. Which is it? Karen didn't answer. Dennis Park looked like he wanted to disappear into the concrete floor. The other board member was staring at Karen with an expression of dawning horror. I have documentation, I said, that may help clarify the situation. Patricia turned to me. What kind of documentation? I handed her the folder. She opened it and began reading. The deed, the plat map, the tax records, the board minutes, the recording of Karen's neighborhood meeting, the accounts from Eleanor and Tomas and Sarah, the certified letters from the HOA's attorney, the grant application with its false statements highlighted in yellow. Patricia read for a long time. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant chirping of birds outside. Karen stood frozen, her laminated binder clutched against her chest, her face pale. Finally, Patricia closed the folder. Mrs. Delacroix, based on what I've seen here, the county will be revoking the Willow Creek Estates Emergency Preparedness Grant, effective immediately. The HOA will be required to return all disbursed funds within 30 days. Additionally, we will be referring this matter to the county attorney's office for review of potential grant fraud. That's ridiculous, Karen said, her voice rising. This is a misunderstanding. The board authorized everything. The community supports this. The community, Patricia said calmly, does not have the authority to grant control of private property. The site control statement you submitted was false. The equipment inventory was inaccurate. The budget documentation contains discrepancies. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a pattern of misrepresentation. I want to speak to my attorney. You're welcome to do so, but the county's decision is final. The grant is revoked. Karen turned to me, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw something other than confidence in her expression. It was fear. Real, genuine fear. She'd built her authority on the assumption that no one would check the paperwork, that no one would question her claims, that the appearance of power was the same as power itself, and now the paperwork was being checked, and her authority was crumbling, and she didn't know what to do. This is your fault, she said, her voice shaking. You could have just let us use the shelter. You could have been reasonable. I was reasonable, I said. I asked you to show me the document. You couldn't. That's not my fault. Patricia and her team packed up their equipment and left. Karen stood in my backyard for another 10 minutes, making phone calls, her voice getting shriller with each conversation. Dennis Park sat on the bumper of the HOA SUV with his head in his hands. The other board member had already left, walking back toward the clubhouse with the stiff gait of someone who'd just realized they'd been complicit in something they didn't fully understand. Eventually, Karen climbed into her SUV and drove away. She didn't look at me. She didn't say goodbye. She just left, her tires crunching on the gravel, her laminated binder still clutched against her chest, like the last remnant of an authority that no longer existed. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. The county formally revoked the grant and demanded repayment of the $23,750 that had already been disbursed. The HOA's reserves, which Karen had been draining for years to fund her various projects, couldn't cover the full amount. The board voted to impose a special assessment on all residents to make up the difference. which meant that 83 households were now paying for Karen's fraud. The residents were not happy. An emergency board meeting was called. I didn't attend, but Eleanor did, and she told me afterward that it was the most chaotic meeting she'd ever seen. Residents demanded answers. Karen tried to defend herself, but her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate defensiveness that only made things worse. Tomas Reyes called for a vote of no confidence. It passed unanimously. Karen resigned the following morning. Her resignation letter, which Eleanor forwarded to me, was 3 sentences long and blamed unforeseen administrative complications for the situation. It did not apologize. It did not acknowledge any wrongdoing. It simply ended. Dennis Park resigned a week later. The other board members, the ones who'd voted for the resolution without questioning Karen's claims, faced angry residents at every turn. 2 of them sold their houses and moved away within 6 months. The county attorney's office declined to pursue criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence of intentional fraud rather than gross negligence. But the damage to Karen's reputation was done. She was no longer the powerful HOA president who could command a room with her clipboard and her laminated maps. She was just a woman who'd lied on a grant application and cost her neighbors thousands of dollars. I saw her once, about 3 months after everything ended. She was at the grocery store, pushing a cart down the cereal aisle, and she looked smaller than I remembered. She saw me, and for a moment our eyes met, and then she looked away and turned her cart down another aisle. She didn't say anything, neither did I. The sign at the end of my driveway came down the day after Karen resigned. I took it down myself, unscrewing it from the post and carrying it to the garage, where I stored it with the rest of the evidence I'd collected. The folder went into my filing cabinet, a thick manila record of everything that had happened, everything that had been said, everything that had been proven false. The shelter went back to being what it had always been, a quiet concrete room with yellow walls and a steel door, a place where I could sit on hot afternoons and remember Elena's humming. Remember the way she'd painted those walls and said she wanted it to feel like morning. Some people think authority comes from being loud, from having a clipboard and a laminated map and a board resolution printed on letterhead. But real ownership is quieter than that. It's recorded in county files and tax records and deeds that predate the people who try to claim them. It's documented in paper trails that outlast the loudest voices in the room. Karen Delacroix thought she could take my shelter because she was used to people not pushing back. She thought a board vote was the same as a deed. She thought a grant application was the same as permission. She thought silence was surrender. She was wrong about all of it. I still go down to the shelter sometimes, not because I need to, but because I want to. I sit in the quiet and look at the yellow walls and think about the night in 2013, when 12 people crowded into this space and listened to the wind scream overhead. I think about Elena handing out blankets, her voice calm and steady, the way she always was in a crisis. I think about the way Karen thanked me afterward, her face pale, her hands shaking. I wonder if she remembers that night. I wonder if she remembers that the shelter she tried to steal was the same shelter that kept her safe when the tornado came. Probably not. People like Karen have short memories for the things they owe other people, but the record remembers. The deed remembers. The county file remembers. And that's enough. I locked the shelter door and walked back up the concrete stairs into the morning sunlight. The gravel crunched under my boots. The birds were singing. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started up, the sound of a normal Thursday in a neighborhood that was slowly returning to normal. My coffee was still warm. I sat on the porch and drank it, looking out at the backyard, at the shelter door, at the place where the sign used to be. The post was still there, a reminder of everything that had happened. I'd take it down eventually, but for now, I left it standing. A reminder that some people think they can claim what isn't theirs, and a reminder that they're always wrong, eventually, when someone keeps the receipts.